Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honour to rise tonight on this adjournment debate, and I want to acknowledge that I'm standing here on the traditional territory, unceded, of the Algonquin Anishinabe people. The question I'm pursuing tonight, I originally asked on April 27th, so it had not been long since we'd received the final chapter of the 6th assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, with its most dire warnings ever. Madam Speaker, what I asked the Prime Minister was that given that we'd been told by the IPCC that emissions must peak globally by 2025 and drop dramatically from there to at least half by 2030, how could it be that 2 days later the government approved the Bay du Nord project? How could it be that 3 days later the budget included continuing to build the Trans Mountain pipeline while somehow transferring this monstrosity to indigenous ownership? The Prime Minister's answer, as ever, was that the government's doing so much, and they've committed $100 billion to be spent between 2016 and 2030. $100 billion is a lot of money. That doesn't save us. The government's plan doesn't come close to holding to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees. We're facing some very serious realities, and talking points won't do. I have to admit that I made an error in my question on April 27th. As bad as things were, and as I quoted from the IPCC lead author who said, quote, "It's now or never," unquote. I read the report of the IPCC as saying, as I just did, that we have until 2025 globally to ensure that emissions have peaked and dropped from there. I was wrong. I went back and reread page 22 of the Summary for Policymakers of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 6th Assessment Report. We don't have till 2025. We have less time. The quote is exactly that global emissions must peak between 2020 and at the latest before 2025. So, Madam Speaker, this isn't a political debate, and I know that the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary is as good and decent a person as we're ever going to find in this place. And the Minister's a good person, and the Prime Minister's a good person, but it doesn't matter. The difference between policies developed by good people that fall short on climate change and policies by people who don't believe that climate change exists, in the words of Bill McKibben, one of our leading champions for climate action globally, the difference is losing more slowly. The Liberal plan before us does not deal with the science. It doesn't. Because setting net zero by 2050 as if it means anything, it's spin. It's not science. Net zero by 2050 is only relevant if global emissions peak before 2025 and drop rapidly from there. Now, I know what the Honourable Minister has said in this place. Oh, well, Bay du Nord, the emissions aren't Canada's problem. Oh, really? When did you lose your moral compass? The emissions don't matter if they happen somewhere else. Canada is to continue to increase producing oil and gas, and it's not our problem if the emissions in other countries condemn our children to an unlivable world, because that is what we're talking about, nothing less than that. So when we have a choice between now or never, please don't choose never.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the points raised by the Honourable Member from Saanich Gulf Islands. I always very much like discussing this issue with her. It's very important to me, fighting climate change, and it's an issue that really guides the work that I do in this place every day. Now, I would point out that we are at the point of seeing a flattening of emissions from this country, and that is a very big deal. So in 2019, we began to see a decoupling of where the economy grew and emissions were flattening. They were not growing in the same way that the economy was. 2020, our emissions, in fact, dropped, but it was a different year. We all know that because of transportation. We didn't travel in the way we had before. But I will point out that some of that drop is a permanent piece that comes from work that we have done on our electrical grid, removing coal-fired electricity from the grid as we're doing. So there are steps and positive steps, and I think that it's really important to highlight some of that as well, because I feel the anxiety. I think so many people do, and it's important to point that progress is being made. Now, the member has also raised Baie du Nord project. And, you know, I've pointed out we are making progress. There is work being done. It is hard work. We put in a price on carbon pollution. That was a big deal. We actually had to fight it all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada to make that stick. That was a lot of hard work, and it's having an impact. It's a very strong market mechanism. But if we work towards next things, we're mandating zero-emission vehicles so that 100% of all new light-duty vehicles sold by 2035 will be zero emissions. We're retrofitting buildings as is set out in the emission reductions plan. And as quickly as we seek to make that transition, there are many logistical challenges that we are overcoming to make that happen quickly. We are still in a place where in the current moment, we do rely on oil and gas for our homes and our transportation. And even as we transition from the combustion of fossil fuels, and this was actually something that was a big learning for me, even as we move away from the combustion of fossil fuels, there's going to remain a need for non-combustion related use. For example, I was at my bike shop talking to someone about my bike, the oil to lubricate my bicycle. Right now, there isn't another quality way to lubricate the chain on my bike. Or in the case of plastics used in a medical context. Right now, those are needs that are still there. So the world will still need some fossil fuels, not necessarily for combustion, but there's still going to be a need. Which brings me to the question of Baie du Nord. The federal government accepted the environmental assessment of the Impact Assessment Agency regarding Baie du Nord project after 4 years of consideration, scrutiny by scientific experts. The projected emissions from Baie du Nord are 10 times less than oil sands, and on average, and 5 times less than the average oil and gas project. Ultimately, I'm going to highlight this because this is something that's important to me as I look at all of this. The atmosphere sees emissions, doesn't see production barrel numbers. What we're doing is we are driving down combustion of fossil fuels in our own country through the work that I've outlined above, and there is so much work that's being done. We're also putting a cap on emissions from the oil and gas sector. Those are all steps that we are taking that are important steps forward. Now, I would say we are making tremendous progress. It is a hard mountain to move, but we are doing it. And I thank the honourable member for all of her feedback and work on this issue.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thanks to the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. I didn't say in my 4 minutes up here that the government isn't working. I didn't say that individuals aren't working hard. I didn't say that they're making no progress. I said that the totality of what this government has proposed does not protect my grandchildren from the Mad Max dystopic future that awaits them on the trajectory we are on. So we must be sure we do more. There is no excuse for this government wasting billions of dollars on the Trans Mountain Pipeline. There is no excuse for an emissions reduction plan that includes an increase by 21% by 2030 of oil and gas production. There is no excuse for approving Baie du Nord. Hang your heads in shame, my liberal friends who claim to be climate active. You must do more. We stand on the edge of too late, but it's not yet too late.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I do understand the urgency. It is in fact something I take very seriously in the work that I do. It is something that I take to heart, and yet there is urgency in the work that we're doing. If only in looking in the emissions reductions plan, it goes through every sector of our economy, putting forward projections to reduce our emissions. We have signed on to agreements, international agreements. Canada joined over 100 countries in signing the Global Methane Pledge to reduce global anthropogenic methane emissions by 30% by 2030. If we look at all of the work put together, including reducing emissions by 40 to 45% from 2005 levels by 2030, and we are on a path to net zero by 2050. It is urgent. I absolutely agree. And we are working with that urgency. We will continue to do so. Thank you, Madam Speaker.